Hello, everyone. My name is OCL, and today's topic is labor markets. Let's get started. My first slide was in the introduction. I just want to give a little overview about it. The article is titled "Labor Market Impacts of COVID-19 and Hourly Workers in Small and Medium Business Size Businesses." This was basically a study article that used scheduling data, and it was basically from a company called Homebase. Um, this was the data was basically tracking the hours people worked and basically overall employment in the U.S. during the COVID-19 pandemic. Basically, the question was asked, what affected coworkers when COVID-19 in the early months. The article proved that it was mostly when businesses closed, they reopened, or even when people were hired, meaning you or other people. That really was a hard thing for everyone, mostly. Going to point one, my first point, I titled it Reopening and Hours Restoration. This was basically many businesses started to open up after the shutdown during the pandemic, meaning they reopened during the pandemic, basically, basically. Self-explanatory. In April 2020, about 45% of businesses were closed, and then later on around I say late May it dropped to around 30%. This meant that some businesses reopened, and that meant people got jobs, so that was pretty good. Reopening gave workers jobs, but there were little hours and small shifts, and around 32% less to be exact. um, it was I believe 60% of an improvement from April, so it kind of got good, I guess you could say. Sorry, excuse me. Um, this basically is explaining that people were hired again, but they had little schedules and had less hours, or they got paid less. But overall, the labor market was improving slowly, but not drastically, since workers had some hours but little shift. For me, so basically, let's say you had a 42-hour shift back then, you would have like a 12-hour shift, and there would be little workers, so it wasn't really that good. Yeah. But moving on to my point two, increasement in hours. Basically, hours were increased when they opened sooner rather than waiting, meaning that the businesses that opened sooner or that didn't close at all, let their employers, or it was a benefit for employers or just people overall that wanted to work there because they had more hours and overall just got paid more. But work hours were 56% more higher than the lowest point during the pandemic, which was around, I believe, 30%. So that meant people had more working hours, meaning their shift wasn't that, I guess, little. In some states that businesses never closed down, hours were 40% higher than their lowest point, meaning that in some states, not all, in the U.S., they didn't close at all. But there was restrictions, there was procedures to follow for customers and employers. But this helped employers since it was like 40% higher than the lowest point. But the difference is that they didn't close down, and it wasn't completely zero or really low. So some employers were paid from little hours, but then it got better from that compared to people who worked at businesses that closed down officially. But basically, infection rates and economic conditions influence when businesses reopened or the hours employees had, meaning that the infection rates, meaning how many people got infected, basically, or sadly passed away. This affected when businesses reopened or how many hours people had. The hours people had, probably they got sick or someone in the team got sick or just people overall, like the customers, anyone. And basically, the a little summary overall, health conditions and government was involved when employers had jobs, meaning that their health was important, and basically the government overall was worried about, hey, are they safe? Hey, is this good? Is this bad? But moving on to my point number three, rehiring of employees. This was basically when businesses reopened and hired people who used to work there. So in around late May, I believe, businesses gained back around 60% of their employees, and about half of the hours they had were gained back. So meaning, let's say you had backing into the 42 hour shift, you wouldn't get that completely, but let's say it would be like 30, like high 20s, but it's something rather than just like 10s or barely anything. 90% of workers were rehired, meaning that the people who worked there had their job back, but the people who were new, they were hired, but it was more of the people who worked there back then because there was trust, bond. They were, I guess, experienced more at the managers or the corporations just knew, hey, they worked for us. Why shouldn't they work for us again? Because they were let go or they were just fired because of the pandemic. Basically, overall, businesses kept their relationship and cared for their workers in the pandemic. And this basically proved it by hiring around 90% of workers instead of looking for new employers. Meaning, they instead of looking for new employers directly, they decided to, hey, let's gain back the people who we let go for me, because I mean they worked for us and they've been hardworking. They worked for us for a good time, and we trust them more than new employers. But overall, most workers were having shorter working hours, and they recovered what they lost, like their job, but the pandemic made it harder. So even though they gained back their jobs, they needed more money. But since it was a pandemic, they weren't really financially stable. Conclusion: COVID-19 had a huge impact on the hours employees have had, but most of them lost their jobs completely, and most of them gained their jobs but lost their hours. So people who lost their jobs had no hours, and it was hard to be employed. And the people who had a job, it was hard for them to have the same hours they had, but they had a job. Sorry. When businesses reopened, they found their old employees, but some had less hours than what they had. So basically, meaning that people who worked at an old place, sorry, who worked at an old place, they would get the jobs back, but not completely like their hours, but they will have a job at least. The labor market was becoming better, but workers weren't as economically stable as before the pandemic. Meaning that before the pandemic, people were better financially than during the pandemic, obviously. But I believe the pandemic overall really affected all of us, people with or without jobs, because I mean teens and people who are mostly under 18 depend on an income source like our parents and all. And if they don't have a job or they don't have anywhere to have like money or income, then there's in other words, they're going in the wrong path, and then we're following behind because they're our main source of money. But overall, people like me, we weren't hired. Young people who wanted to work, they couldn't have job opportunities. We would be trapped inside because there was no jobs. We would be inside because of our health. But overall, just it was really a bad experience, and most people were hired, but it's getting better little by little. But overall, just the pandemic really affected all of us overall financially and just health wise. But it's getting better little by little. But thank you for listening. I hope you took something from this presentation. But have a good day, have a good night, and just have a good rest of your day. But thank you very much.